But for years I worked in publishing on the publicity side of things, and so my job was to take out the authors, take out the and to deal with the media, and to wine and dine the media. And I took the wine and the dine, but mostly the wine, really the martini part of it, very seriously.
This is the Knockin Doorz Down podcast. If you're looking to hear stories of hope, inspiration, and turning your greatest adversities into your advantage, well, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Jason LaChance, and through my addiction recovery and struggles with anxiety and depression, I dug into my passion of speaking with people who have transformed their lives. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and if you get a lot out of this podcast, share with a friend, and don't forget the archive of interviews we have. Bam Margera, Brandon Novak, Kat Von D, Charlie Sheen, Edward Furlong, Kelly Osbourne. The list goes on and on of amazing guests that have been on the podcast, sharing how they have found purposeful lives. Speaking of purpose, how about a lifestyle brand with purpose? 5150 LTM. That's right. Not only is it a lifestyle brand that can fit whatever it is you're trying to achieve in life, but they give back to the community. And you, the listener of Knockin Doorz Down, get 20% off every time you shop at 5150 LTM. All you have to do is use the code KDD20 at checkout and get 20% off. And how does 5150 give back to the community? Portions of the sales benefit the Carlos Vieira Foundation. Their three amazing programs: the Race to End the Stigma, the Race for Autism, and the Race to be Drug-Free. More on the Carlos Vieira Foundation, go to carlosvierafoundation.org. And my guest is Jamie Brickhouse, a natural raconteur, writer, comedic storyteller, TikTok sensation, and author of Dangerous When Wet, a memoir of booze, sex, and my mother. You may have seen one of his TikToks, #StoryInHeels videos, which has been seen over 5 million times, liked more than 1 million times, and has over 60,000 followers. I've been on his podcast, Sober Podcast, which is part of the Sober Network, and Jamie is a loud voice for addiction recovery. Jamie Brickhouse, thank you for joining me on Knockin Doorz Down.
So glad to be here, Jason.
Yeah, you're one of my new favorite people, so I'm glad I get to talk to you. It's like twice in a span of a month or so. And
yeah, you were on the Sober Podcast, and it was a great interview. So glad to be on the other end of the microphone, so to speak.
Yeah, me too, because I think, people need to hear more of not only your story, but your knowledge. And that's really what I'm going to be inquisitive about today. But I like to start with gratitude. I find anybody that is in long-term recovery, gratitude is a big part of our daily life. So 3 things you're grateful for today.
I'm grateful to be in Provincetown, Massachusetts. I'm here for a gay sober roundup, and I've always wanted to come for this because I've heard about it for years and never been able to make it for various reasons, but I finally made it, and here I am. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that it's sunny outside, and I got to go for a 4-mile run this morning and take in the great sights of this beautiful town. And what else am I grateful for? I'm grateful to be sober. Don't forget that.
That's interesting. You went for a run today. I got to ask you because, if people may not know your story, you've worked in different industries and things like that, been a high achiever in my estimation. But it was kind of almost like alcohol was almost a business culture thing. So I'm interested, were you always into running before sobriety, or is this something you integrated over your years of recovery?
I have been a runner off and on since college. And but I also had, and when I say off and on, I mean there was some serious off time. Like years of not running. I started running in college. I got the freshman 15.
Oh yes.
And my mother, Mama Jean, she said, "Oh, you got to run. That run will take that off, and take that off." And so I started doing it there, and then I would run off and on. But in my drinking days, which were many years, I was not running. I was going to the gym and not sticking with it and not being able to stick with it. But it wasn't until I got sober that I could really stick with exercising, with going to the gym, and with running. And yeah, I run about 5 miles, anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. But and you were saying about my drinking and how it was integrated into my career. I worked in publishing for many years, and I mean, I still do tangentially. I'm a writer now, but I have my own company, a speakers bureau, and I represent mostly writers, authors for speaking engagements. But for years I worked in publishing on the publicity side of things, and so my job was to take out the authors, take out and to deal with the media, and to wine and dine the media. And I took the wine and the dine, but mostly the wine, really the martini part of it, very seriously.
And I can relate to that. When we had conversed before, I believe we talked about, I had a 20-year radio career, primarily rock radio. And so, all of a sudden you get to hang out with these rock stars that you like their music and you feel like you're part of the in crowd. It just became, it was one of the additional things thrown into my life as an already insecure individual looking for validation. It was, just another one of those ingredients to use and have an excuse.
Oh yeah, it was an excuse. I was like, oh, this is sanctioned drinking. Where I'm expected to drink. I'm expected to be the life of the party. And I took that to heart, and I also, but just like I was abusing alcohol, I was abusing the privilege. I was, I had a lot of drinking T&E reports that didn't involve any of my author clients or members of the media.
Right.
In other words, it was me and my friends for a lot of those padded expense accounts.
Did substances come into your life early on, or were you kind of a late bloomer?
Fairly early on. Well, now to think about it, before I had a drink, I've never really, I guess I thought about it, but I haven't articulated. Before I had a drink, I smoked pot when I was about in fifth grade. I had an older brother, 8 years older, and he got me to try it. And I remember I smoked it out of I think a corn cob pipe that I had from a Popeye doll. But I didn't like it. You know what? I didn't. I don't think I smoked it right, and I smoked it right, and I don't think I even got high from that. But in high school, I smoked, and then I did smoke pot occasionally, but it was never. And I'm trying to think if I did any of the other drugs in high school when I was drinking. And then in college, though, I started experimenting with drugs. So ecstasy. Oh no, high school. I did ecstasy my senior year in prom and loved it. And then did it off and on, in high school. I mean, in college and into my 20s and 30s. But and in college, I started. So it was really in college that I started seriously experimenting with drugs. So it was ecstasy, cocaine, LSD, um, and drugs were sprinkled out throughout the rest of my drinking, career. But alcohol was my first in love. And at the end of my drinking, I was only drinking. I wasn't doing any drugs anymore.
Yeah, I can relate to that very much. Yeah, it seemed that any other type of chemical got in the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, at the end, I was drinking so much, and I was so physically addicted to it that I really couldn't handle the other drugs. They were too. It was, it was too much, even for me. Yeah, and pot, by the way, I never liked pot, but I smoked it every day for about 15 years, because I had a partner who liked pot, and he had it. And so if it was there, I did it. But when it wasn't around, and it was a high I never really enjoyed. But I never thought about it when it wasn't around, and I never once bought it, and I never sought it out. But that just shows you what an alcoholic addict is. Like, if it's there, well, of course, why wouldn't you do it? I mean, you have to do it.
Exactly. I mean, we're garbage cans. Some of us, we're just like,
Right,
all
right.
right. I mean, like people have asked me when I've dabbled, it's like, yeah, pills, some powders and things like that, but it was never a purchase. It was just like,
Yeah,
oh, it's there. Somebody's like, oh, hey, I got this script and it'll, you're in back pain. Here you go. All right, that's cool. I'll wash it down with a 6-pack of beer at least, So it was, I was very much kind of that garbage can addict in that way. I had my primary, my love
right.
was alcohol, but those other things, if it was available, all right.
Sure, why not? And but said I would never do heroin, and I never did.
Mm.
Um, and I I wonder though if I had been, but I was also never offered it. I was never exposed to it. I was never in a situation, I think, if I had been drunk and or high enough and it had been around, I may have done it. So,
Knockin Doorz Down by Carlos Vieira, now available wherever you get audiobooks.
I wasn't done partying, and I didn't want the binge to end. I think I knew that when I finally got home, I'd have to face what I had done, and I wasn't ready to do that. Being responsible for my actions wasn't something I was looking forward to. I had abandoned my wife and baby, my family, and my business. I wanted to avoid the shame of returning to what I had left behind. Even though I was not yet going home, I wasn't sure I had enough resources to continue the binge.
Click the link in the podcast description to find out more. I've pondered that too. I never had heroin or meth, but I had a minor procedure prescribed oxy, and it made me really sick, and I threw up. And most people, when I tell that, are like, me too. And then I became an oxy addict. I was like, no. It takes me like 20 drinks to at least get to the point of throw up. I'll go for that route. And it whatever reason, that never clicked. Cocaine, any of those, it just never clicked. That it was like, ooh, I really want to do that again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, no, I did. I did like I liked ecstasy, or the kids call it Molly now. And although I hear it's a little bit different, but I very much enjoyed and sought out. Cocaine, I did. I liked it, but it was a love hate, and it was one of those where I was afraid. Like I also said I would never do it, because I knew how addictive it was, and I had seen people my parents' age had were destroyed by it, or their lives were ruined by it. And I said I'd never do it. And then, I was in college and someone had it and I did it. And I was like, oh, this is great. And then it was a love hate, like I do it and then, and have the worst hangovers of my life the next morning because there was also drinking. So you have the drinking and the booze and the drug hangover. And I would say, oh, that's horrible. I'm never going to do that again because I feel so awful, but I would.
For you was, and we talked about it when I was on your podcast, and I'll include that link in the description in case people missed it or have yet to subscribe, because you do just awesome work, wonderful guests, and always informative. But I spoke a little, I definitely see the trauma and the lineage of addiction for me that really led me down that path. Was it kind of similar for you, or were you just someone that it was like peer pressure and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm off to the races?
No, it was to drink by the time I was 5. To me, it was about being an adult. And I was a precocious child, and I was more comfortable being around my parents and their friends than I was my peers. And, I just saw childhood as a waste of time. And I wanted to bypass it and go straight to adulthood. And I liked what I saw in old movies and TV shows like Bewitched, and where they drank and I liked parties, and my parents entertained a lot. And so I just thought, I glamorized alcohol from a very young age and saw it as being an adult, and I wanted to be an adult, and you got to dress up and you got to go to parties, which also meant that you drank. And so I also saw alcohol as a fast ticket to adulthood. So I started drinking when I was 14.
Mm.
And so it was something I wanted to do most of my life, most of my childhood. I just saw it as something as glamorous and fun. So it didn't come out of trauma or a way to escape. Ultimately, I mean, I certainly did use it as a way to escape, before I even realized it. And I embraced it. And I think, and for me, I think the disease of alcoholism is a gene trait, or I inherited it, from my father's side of the family. He was a drinker, probably an alcoholic, and there's a lot of other heritage of drinking on my father's side of the family, and so I also think I was wired for it.
Well, and I had spoken here on the podcast with a neuropsychologist. He also was an alcoholic, or is an alcoholic in recovery, however you want to label it. And he said there's definitely studies that there's some people you just cannot drink your way into alcoholism. It's just there is something about that genetic makeup for us, the way we process the ethyl alcohol and what it does. Like, I don't know about you. It sounds like you were very similar. People would always be amazed, like, dude, aren't you tired? Like, no, it gives me energy. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I was also, you were talking about throwing up earlier, that it would take you a while, many drinks for you to get to that point. I was proud of I mean, I didn't enjoy throwing up, but I often did off and after several drinks. But for a lot of people, then in a lot of alcoholics are people who drink, then that's the end of the evening. But for me, I was proud of the fact that I could throw up and go, so I would do that. And then it was like, oh, okay, now it's like a clean plate, and continue drinking.
Yeah, I definitely had compatriots that it was like, dude, you're awesome. That's gnarly. Like it became like, yeah, it was like supported. I mean, hanging out with guys that are outweighing me by 100 pounds and I'm drinking them under the table. And it was that additional validation, like, oh, it's always going to be a good time when Jason's around.
Yeah. I had that validation too. Like, oh yeah, your life's the party. And, and people were used to seeing me with a martini, always at the end of my right hand,
Right. And it just, I mean, you're, for people that don't follow you on social media, I mean, you like, I would love if I had a couple $1,000s and said, Jamie, take me shopping, make me look like an adult, because you always got it together. And it's really interesting how you explain that parallel from childhood, like the Bewitched and the shows Come Home and the martinis made for the dad. And
right.
It's so fascinating how we, in addiction, many of us build this story about ourselves and then carry it out.
Yeah, that's a good point, where we kind of embrace the story, and then it becomes self-fulfilling, and it's funny about one other thought, a slightly different tangent, but back to what we were saying about the cause of alcoholism, or whether it's inherited or not. And Carol Burnett, she famously does not drink, and that her parents were alcoholics, and she was raised by her grandmother because her parents were unable to take care of her, and because of that, she never drank. And I, knowing what I've observed from other alcoholics in recovery, many of them, their story is, oh, I saw the way my parents behaved on alcohol and drugs, and I told myself that I would never do that. But then, I did, and then I became, and then I took off, and now here I am. And I think in like someone like Carol Burnett, I think she probably didn't inherit the gene or the trait or the or the disease, whatever you call it, because I don't think if she had, or someone like that, I'm just using her as an example because she's a famous example, but I don't think if she had the gene or the trait, even if she was able to say, "Oh, I don't want to do that because of what it did to my parents," I don't think, but if you had one drink, you'd be off to the races, despite logic and despite your commitment not to do that. It's stronger than you are.
Yeah. No, very valid point, because, and I don't think I've talked about it. My brother, he's a quote unquote normie, never an issue for him. And then I have some cousins that, yes, very clearly an issue, and some that aren't. And, it runs on both sides of the family. So I think you have an incredibly valid point there, that some people it hits and some it doesn't. My brother can go,
Yeah.
I think he's on like this 90-day challenge right now for himself with physical fitness and not having a drink or two on the weekend with his wife as part of that. And so he can go the 90 days and it's like, meh, yeah, no big deal.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I could do it. So
right? Yeah, well,
it's an all or nothing for me, and I'm glad I'm nothing for the last. It'll be 15 years in December. So.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, same. I had somebody the other day go like, "Are you sure you're an alcoholic?" And I just looked at him and I went, "Well, I'm going to tell you this. I'm not going to attempt it, so I'll rather go through life believing I'm an alcoholic than test it, because my life's pretty damn good,
Yeah.
Coming up on my longest term of sobriety, and like things have changed, and I want to ask you about that, because you're so active in the recovery community. How do you talk with newcomers about it? I try to explain, look, you're going to suck at this at first, and that's okay.
How do I talk to, well, first of all, I tell my story, or a bit of my stories, because I know, hopefully that's so they can relate. And so they, know that, I too have done some of the things that they have probably done and are experiencing. And part of that story is letting them know how difficult it was for me to get sober. I first tried to get sober 20 years ago, and I tell them about that and how I, didn't fully commit to the program, and decided that, and after a few months decided I was a functioning alcoholic, which I guess I was. And I made the decision. I was like, oh, as long as the word functioning is in front of alcoholic, I'm okay. And what I didn't understand or accept was the idea that it's a progressive disease and that it gets worse. And so I continued to drink, and my life got worse than it was when I first decided to get sober, or tried to get sober. And then even after that, when I bottomed out on a suicide attempt and then went to rehab for 60 days, it still took me 2 years to finally get completely sober. And so I talk about those, and I talk about those relapses. And I had one sponsee who was very similar to me and with relapsed a lot. So I told him my story and about how difficult that is, but that you just, but the important part is you can always come back, and you can always keep trying. So
the thing I've kind of adopted and try to explain is the echoes of life, to some of these newer guys or people, if I'm working with them directly. And it's like destruction's really quick. You think about like a skyscraper or building, and then, maybe 2 years to build, but then if they're going to, demolish it, well, that's a pretty quick process. And so I try to explain to them, tell me if this resonates with you, that like the echoes you put out, the next right thing, it might take quite some time. Like things that I did almost 3 years ago after my last relapse are starting to come to fruition now. So it's in that doing the next right thing. Like, you had a system of instant gratification, and that shit's going away. Now we got to switch your mind to this echoes of life and doing the next right thing, the being of service. And it's going to take time. And I think that's a real
and long-term payback. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I think it's tough in American society alone, let alone when you're in recovery.
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, I love the talking about how fast destruction is. And it's even like a meal. A home cooked meal. So think about how long it may have taken you, anywhere from an hour to all day, to cook a meal, and then how long does it take you to consume it? Like that, and it's gone.
Yeah, if it's my girlfriend's chicken parmesan, it's gone real fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, because you're at an event that right now, and I'm seeing, I don't get the opportunity, and maybe it's just where I live. It's very rural, that not enough of the LBGTQ plus community comes to maybe more generalized meeting that I'm attending. But those
Mm-hmm.
that I do meet, I see a lot of trauma, not necessarily in the childhood, but in being themselves, in how society hopefully is accepting, but we know isn't always the case.
Yeah.
What are kind of, I don't know. I'm looking for some nuggets of wisdom there, because I have had listeners that have reached out and asked, hey, I'm a gay man, and I haven't heard you talk to someone that's gay. Can you, connect with someone there? Maybe some of that wisdom for them, that I think, although we're all human, there comes a different set of challenges.
Yeah, I think one of those challenges, well, there are many, but the fact that acceptance is a part of accepting who you are can be difficult when so many people around you don't accept um, LGBTQ people, or trans people, or lesbians, or gay men, or whatever the case, whoever you are, and so that's very difficult. And if you're, crying for alcohol and drug use, that's yet another reason to escape. Um, and also in the LGBTQ culture, especially with in the gay male world, alcohol and drugs are glamorized even more so. And for many years, gay bars were really the only place that we could meet, and explore ourselves. So there was often, sanctioned alcohol, and often um, um, heavily promoted, and that lifestyle. And so if you're already struggling with alcohol and drugs, and then you're in this culture that celebrates it, and encourages it, it makes it that much harder to get sober.
Yeah.
If you're in that, and if you're in that space.
Well, and I think I have a friend, and his dating history, we were having a conversation, and I'm like, well, every time you go out, when you're looking for, a man that you want to take interest in, and him take interest in you, it seems to me there's always some alcohol there. And I'm going to tell you, like,
And
I'm just,
maybe a few lines too.
yeah, right. And I'm like, just give this a little bit of a thought. Is
Mm-hmm.
that, most of us first date, we're on best behavior, already nervous, maybe, overinflating who we are, all these different things. But then you take in alcohol, and it tells you so many different stories. That's like, maybe try to find something, that is a sober environment to try to meet someone, because he's like, I don't know what it is, the gay community in the Bay Area, I can't seem to find a good man. And I was like, well, maybe change your picker and your circumstances for it, and it might
Right, right.
shift. And I think that's hard in general for people.
It is hard in general, and I mean, I know that uh, people of all stripes, often, one of the things that they have to get used to once they get sober is having sex sober,
Oh,
because a lot of people didn't do it, before. But it seems to be more of an issue with, and I'm speaking from who I know the most from the LGBT community, which is gay men. it seems to be even more of an issue with gay men because of what we were just saying. So alcohol and drugs is so much a part of the culture, and they're an alcoholic as well. And that was, always around. So that's something that is really, can be monumental in sobriety is sex, and having it sober. And then of course, being the drugs, I did crystal meth a few times, but I never went, never became addicted to it or was, a regular user of it. And I'm very grateful for that. And that, a lot of times I mean, alcohol and drugs can be tied up with sex anyway. And I mean, like for me, cocaine was often, tied up with sex, or if I did cocaine, I wanted to have sex. And with crystal meth, that's a big issue, especially with gay men, because it's often used for that, for sexual purposes. And a lot of crystal meth users have a hard time. That's one of the biggest problems, and often many of them relapse. Many guys, crystal meth addicts, relapse because of the sexual component.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. It plays a huge vital role. And I personally, with me, and I don't remember if we shared it when we were talking on your podcast, going through what I did in my childhood, molestation, exposed to hardcore pornography at a very early age. It was really it still is at times challenging for me. I even noticed it last night. My lovely girlfriend, she's just being sweet and in touch. She wasn't necessarily alluding to, wanting any full blown sexual activity, but I noticed myself tense up. And it's still something that I have to deal with, even as a hetero male, and how it played into my sexual choices. That was stuff that I really had to deal with. I did some Sex and Love Addiction Anonymous to really try to understand better, as well as in addition to therapy. So it's a huge challenge going into that sobriety. I think that's why oftentimes we recommend go a year sober before you even really kind of consider dating,
Right. Yeah. It is a good, I think it's a good, suggestion to take if you can do it.
How about you? Have relationships gotten easier? Has just being in your own skin gotten easier?
Oh yeah, being in my own skin has definitely gotten easier, and I'm much more confident about who I am, and accepting things. Now I still struggle with low self-esteem from time to time, or but I don't need alcohol or drugs to escape from bad feelings, or to make good feelings feel better. And I think, thankfully, having sexual relations, I long since have not needed alcohol or drugs to be a part of that. But what I have done, occasionally there were times when I would, early on in sobriety, if I would hook up with someone that I didn't know, but through an app or something like that, and they might be drunk or worse on high, and I would say, oh, that's fine, I'm not gonna do that, but it's okay if you do. And I didn't, thank God, but I didn't need to be in those situations. And not only were they dangerous and possibly triggering, but they also weren't fun. Just to be with someone who is on a whole different plane than you. And also, I didn't enjoy being in somebody's space where there was drug paraphernalia around, and they couldn't concentrate because they were more interested in being high than in having sex. And so, I cut that out. And the rule was, if someone said that they were using, I said, oh, thanks, but no thanks. And, moved on.
No, I something I've not shared. So yeah, I was when I was attempting the dating, hard to find sober women in my area. It just is. Just seems to be. And so it's dating a lady that she said she was an occasional drinker. So we, did a couple dates, seemed good. And then, finally the home visit, because I had rules. I was like, you may not be the only person I want to date. So it's, no hand holding, no goodnight kiss. Like, I'm getting to know people. I'm getting to know myself dating as a sober person. Well, and then there was that drinking a little bit too much, got her home, and then the proposition that followed by a display of actions, and it was like, wow, it was a click moment for me going, I'm a completely different person now. I said, I'm sorry, this is not comfortable for me, I'm gonna have to go. And Buddy's like, oh man, come on, she was hot. It's like, I don't care. This felt just the whole scenario felt terrible, wrong, disingenuous. It was just completely inauthentic. Like, we all know alcohol is a great drug for lowering your inhibitions and the anxieties around your decision making. So it was like, no, I want to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, it's not worth it, right?
No. Let me ask you about the book. When did you finally decide it was the right time to write your book and share?
Well, I wanted to be an artist as a writer and a performer, and I did not, and I kind of dabbled in. I mean, I did both those, pursued both those things in high school and college, and then the alcohol took over, and I had time for my career, my job, that was paying the bills, and the booze. And then I stopped writing and performing altogether. And when I got sober, and I was about a year or so sober, a friend of mine who was working for a travel magazine, he asked me to write a piece about a New York restaurant, and that I loved. And I did, and it really felt good, to write. It was just a short little, not even I don't know, 500 words maybe, not even if that much. But it got published, and I was proud of it. And I wrote a couple other things. And then a friend of mine who I used to work with in publishing, she was an editor, and she read it. She said, "Oh, this is really good if you're interested in writing more." And at this point, I was thinking about writing a memoir. And my mother, Mama Jean, had died, and I was, I guess, 2 years sober, and she was a year gone. And so this friend said, if you're interested, this friend of mine, Phyllis, just retired from the Columbia University creative writing program and starting her own workshop. And I enrolled, and I needed I was so glad that I went into that workshop, because I needed it just like I needed rehab. That just meetings alone weren't going to be enough for me. I needed to be removed, but I needed that writing workshop to have a sanctioned environment that said, you can write here, and to give me deadlines, so that I would show up every week with pages to, and then to get the feedback and the validation. And so I built my confidence as a writer, and I realized I did have a book in me, and a memoir. And gosh, I rolled in that class in 2010, and then my first memoir, Dangerous When Wet, a memoir of booze, sex, and my mother, came out in 2015. So that's the evolution. So long answer to your question.
That's the answer I was hoping for. I find it really fascinating, that process.
But you know what, kind of what you were saying about the echoes, about doing the next right thing, and that it takes it a while for you to see that payback and that fruition.
What's some of your favorite responses that you've gotten around the book?
Oh God. There have been a variety of diverse responses, because the book is about my alcoholism, written through the prism of my relationship with my mother, Mama Jean. And so I've heard from a lot of alcoholics in recovery, who some people say that it helped them get sober, that they were struggling to get sober, and which that I love. I mean, that those are some of my favorite responses. Because to tell you the truth, when I wrote it, I didn't write it. I didn't say, "Oh, I want to write this because I want to help people." I wanted to write it because I wanted to express myself as an artist, and this was the story I needed to tell. And of course, I soon realized that, of course, this might also help people as well as maybe entertain them and and move them. And because it's written with a lot of humor, darkly comic, and so knowing that it's helped people to get sober or stay sober by hearing my story and what I went through and what I did to get sober. And then I also heard from a lot of mothers who related, who really loved the mother son story or mother child story that I'm telling in there. But and then mothers of addicts and alcoholics, and it really has helped them to understand addiction and to understand their children. So
That's a beautiful gift that I know your love for performance and writing and stuff started pretty early on in your life, and it's really interesting how those things can come to fruition and unintentionally be of such great service to people.
yeah, yeah.
I know for me, as a kid that grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas changed my life along with the radio. So I would have never predicted, 40 years later,
Right.
Those things to be something. But
Yeah, well, no, it's great. It's great just being yourself and doing what you love to do uh, can help other people.
well, we'll put the link in the podcast description as well for people if they want to get the book. Jamie, we're going to jump into some fun random questions, and I'm going to ask you for the final thoughts. Are you ready, good sir?
I'm ready.
All right. If you could have dinner with any one person, living or not, who would they be and why?
Oh God, that is such a big question. Joan Crawford, because I love old movies, and she's my absolute favorite movie star, and I would like to. I hear he was also probably an alcoholic and a big drinker,
Yeah.
but I heard that she stopped drinking in the last year of her life, and,
Oh,
and
wow.
she died of cancer. And I also heard that when a doctor tried to, she called on a doctor friend, to help her get sober, and he wanted her to go to AA. And she said, "Oh, can you imagine me going to a meeting saying I'm Joan Crawford, I'm an alcoholic? I don't think I can do that." She never did. But I would like to have a dinner with Joan Crawford, and I would like to have it in the last year of her life, and while she's sober, and have a conversation about alcohol.
If you can recollect, worst advice you received early in your recovery and best advice.
Oh, worst advice. Um, Worst advice. I was sharing in a meeting that I had recently relapsed, and I started talking about I what I learned from that relapse and why I thought it was good, and the speaker um, cut me off and said, "You're not ready to share," because I can't remember exactly what he said, but he didn't like that I was saying that my relapse was a good thing, and so he cut me off, and uh, said you shouldn't be sharing that, or something to that extent. So that was the worst advice, and I almost went out over it, and I left the
Sure.
meeting. But luckily, someone came out and talked to me, and I didn't drink. Um, and so the best advice: you can always drink tomorrow.
Huh. I've not heard that one.
Don't drink today. You can always drink tomorrow.
Yeah. That's a good one. I've not heard that. I'm gonna use that at least 3 times and assimilate it. Okay.
Yeah, and you know what? I just an aside on that. I am a two-time suicide attempt survivor, and my advice to anyone who is thinking seriously about suicide is the same advice, which is you can always kill yourself tomorrow. Just don't do it today.
No, thank you for sharing that.
Because you know what? Usually that feeling will pass. That need to drink or that need to end it all, and by the next day, you may not need that.
Yeah.
And if you do, then put it off another day.
Yeah. Right. just push it to another day. Come
Exactly. That's when to procrastinate.
Right. That's where we want to go with that. I always enjoy this one. If you're stranded on a deserted island and you had one movie with you, one music artist's greatest hits, and I'm going to throw in one book.
All right. You think now you're going to think I don't care what you're going to think, but the one movie would be Mildred Pierce, which is a Joan Crawford movie for which she won an Oscar. It's also kind of film noir, and film noir is my favorite genre of movie. So I've often said that if I could only watch one genre of movie for the rest of my life, it would be film noir. So I would have to pick Mildred Pierce because it's film noir and because it's Joan Crawford and it's such a good movie on several levels. And I would pick for the book Joan Crawford, My Way of Life, which is this book she wrote in 72 or 71, and it's very campy. Like in circle, it's a cult classic, and people read it out loud because of the some of the crazy advice that she administers in that book. And but it's also just funny, and I've read it like 3 times, and I would just always be entertained by it on that desert island. And then what was the third one? So a musical artist, not Joan Crawford, not Joan Crawford. Okay. So wait, let's see. Gosh, no, this is a tough one because I really like music and it's a big part of my life. Oh gosh. I think it would be Nancy Wilson. There are a lot of singers I love and a lot of artists I love, but Nancy Wilson, she has beautiful, clear voice. She sang in the 50s into the 80s, from the 1950s into the 1980s. So she sang American Popular Standards, which is my favorite genre of music. And she sang so many different of those songs. So if I was stuck with Nancy Wilson on that island, I'd be a happy island refugee.
Yeah. Right on. Well, Jamie, this is the time where I give you the floor if you want to share anything. There's everything from people struggling new to their recovery, long-term, and loved ones of people or those struggling with mental health as well. Tune in quite often. That's where I get the most feedback, actually, that you just might want to lend some words of wisdom.
I would say to always keep trying. If you want to get sober, if you want to deal with any issues you're having, don't give up and keep seeking help. And if you fall off the wagon, so to speak, that old term, you can always get back on and you can always restart your day. Also remember that, if things are going really shitty and you're like starting to lose hope because of the bad first half of the day you had, remember you can just say, oh, you know what, I'm going to write that off and let's restart this and recharge it. You don't have to wait until tomorrow to do that.
Absolutely. Jamie Brickhouse, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Jason. And the pleasure was mine. So thanks for having me on your show.
On that note, everybody, keep knocking doors down. This is the Knockin Doorz Down podcast, featuring celebrities, experts, and everyday people who have overcome adversities, including addiction, mental health, and trauma, to live purposeful lives. And that's what Knockin Doorz Down is all about.